be part of the People's Army. We might be your last hope.
The numbers are extraordinary. Now, not at all a surprise to me, but still astonishing. So let's just be clear, right? The uni party is over. Finito. The two-party system is about to be smashed. And the deep state, the MSM, and the Westminster class, they can't stop this one. As Trump said, it's going to be too big to rig. So here are these new numbers from Find Out Now showing Reform 4 points clear of Labour at number 1, but devastatingly for Kemi Badenoch's faltering leadership, and this is the crucial thing in terms of today, 11 points ahead of the dying Tories. So for the first time, Nigel isn't even pretending to hide his expectation that something big is happening in Britain.
Now, you might say it's just one poll, and a poll is a snapshot, not a prediction. All true. But Find Out Now have been the most accurate pollers on reform. They've led the way. Today's figures are truly astonishing. They've got us topping the polls at 29%, with the Conservatives way down at 18%. Have a look at this map. That's the prediction for the number of seats we would win. The message that's coming from this is very, very clear. Not only do we have momentum, but if you want to beat Labour, if you want to get them out at the next general election, don't waste your vote with the Conservatives. Come with a winning team, join Reform UK, be part of the People's Army. We might be your last hope.
And that's a big call, isn't it? Your last hope. Your last hope to save Britain. So I guess the idea is, even if you might disagree with Nigel on, I don't know, for example, the issue of mass deportations, or demographic change, or Islam, or Tommy Robinson, is he still the last hope? And do we need to put some of those objections aside? What's fascinating is all of a sudden the questions Richard Tice used to ask, with his tongue, I think, firmly in cheek, are now being seriously put to senior Tory figures. When are you going to step aside to stop dividing the vote on the right? Robert Jenrick, who should be Conservative leader, has certainly set the cat amongst the pigeons by making it clear he doesn't rule out a Reform Conservative pact.
With reform, at some point they are going to be consistently ahead of you in the polls. At what point do the Tory party say, you know what, if you add up Reform and the Conservatives, you're on 45-50% of the market. Why don't you do a deal?
Well, firstly, Reform themselves have said they don't want to do it.
You're splitting the Reform vote.
Reform has said repeatedly.
Oh, God,
that they have
they're going to say that now. That's the art of the deal, isn't it? They're good negotiators.
Said they have no intention of doing this. Kemi has said that she doesn't want to do it either. We are two separate.
You've got to have a non-aggression pact at the very least, right?
My whole mission is to bring home all the small C Conservatives in this country back to the Conservative Party. We should be their natural home. We're not at the moment because of the mistakes that we made in office, the very serious mistakes. It can be done.
Final question. Would you be doing better in the polls if you were the leader of the opposition?
Look, Kemi is our leader.
Go on.
I stood.
That's not our. Come on. That's a politician's answer.
I stood to be leader.
Would the Tories be better in the polls if you were the leader?
It's a nice question to ask.
Was that a no? I think I heard a no.
But look, Kemi is our leader. I chose to serve in the shadow cabinet because I believe that she can be a success and she's working extremely hard. I think it's going to be a long road. That is what we have to accept.
Robert Jenrick would not be doing better than Kemi Badenoch.
Harry, look, what we're trying to do here is turn the Conservative Party around under Kemi's leadership, and I'm here to support her in everything that
I thought you were a straight-talking, honest kind of guy, but there we go. Apologies answer. Robert Jenrick, thank you.
So, I mean, let's just move on from those pathetic Westminster parlour games because that doesn't matter. What matters to me is that Robert Jenrick could be the future of the Conservative Party, and it's very clear that he understands the only way that the Conservative Party has a future is with some sort of deal with Nigel Farage. So cue immediate panic from the uni party. So a Labour spokesperson quickly weighed in, telling The Sun, the cat is out the bag. The Tories won't rule out doing a dodgy backroom deal with Reform. The Conservatives wrecked public services, and Nigel Farage plans to charge NHS patients for thousands of routine treatments. Just imagine what they'd do together. Labour's plan for change is delivering investment and reform to deliver growth, put more money in people's pockets and to secure Britain's borders. I mean, those claims are completely laughable, by the way. The economy is in dire straits. The borders are wide open. The invasion continues. But Kemi's Tories, I think we need to call them Kemi's troubled Tories at the moment, responded unconvincingly, saying reports of a Tory reform pact are complete and utter nonsense. The Conservative Party will not negotiate with people who want to destroy us. Obviously, the point of a pact would be Farage no longer wanting to destroy the Conservative Party. But not everyone within Reform is so keen on the current fighting talk, and this really interested me yesterday. Longtime Conservative figurehead Tim Montgomery, whose defection caused shockwaves in Westminster, has suggested there's some sort of arrogance within the Reform leadership, presumably referring to Farage and the chairman Zia Youssef, who certainly has been having some fun with Labour's membership troubles over the past week. But watch what Tim Montgomery told our friend Alex Phillips.
The poll, the latest poll that's come out this afternoon, the Tories are on 18 or 19%, certainly below 20, and Reform are up to 29.
Woo.
So you're not looking at Reform narrowly ahead now. You know, the whole Conservative sort of thing about waiting, not having any policies, waiting for Reform to implode, it ain't working.
It's not going to work.
It ain't working.
No.
And I'm on this WhatsApp group with sort of fellow Conservative commentators, and they don't really like the Reform Party. And they don't really like what I've done. They're relatively polite to me because they've seen, you know, I'm a friend, but they really don't like Reform, and they can't hide it for very long. And I said, it's, you know, the thing is, the split on the right is real, and you're trying to pretend it's going to go away, and it's going to, the Tory party are automatically going to sort of revert to the position they've always had, which is the primary party of the right. I said, you're out of touch.
Why don't they like Reform? Because this is one thing I try to understand. When people have such an aversion, I'm like, why?
I think there's a whole combination of reasons, and I think one thing I have noticed, Alex, is there is a difference between the Reform member and the Reform leadership. The Reform members are very much like how I used to know the Conservative Party all through my life, sort of really ordinary mainstream people.
Proper people.
One criticism I would make of the Reform leadership is I think there's a bit of a cockiness to them at the moment.
It's an interesting one. It depends how you look at it. I mean, I don't mind the cockiness when it comes to the polls. I guess where I have a problem is this idea that, oh, the only reason we didn't do well at the last election is because we had some wrong-uns in our mix who may have tweeted something positive about Tommy Robinson in 2012. I don't like that approach, and I do think that approach is arrogant. But I think what we can say, and what we can all agree, is that major change is coming nonetheless. As Connor Tomlinson wrote this week for Courage Media, thanks to the last Conservative and current Labour government, the UK will have at least 9 million immigrants added to its population by 2032. Also, a third of babies born in Britain are to immigrant mothers and more to second-generation immigrants. Mohammed is the most common baby name in the UK. And yet some Conservatives are still fighting the lost cause of trying to convince you that this is a good thing. If newcomers are not required to buy into our civilization and can instead live in ethno-cultural silos at odds with the host population, then Britain ceases to be a nation. So maybe Nigel Farage is indeed right, that he is the UK's last hope. And Connor Tomlinson joins me now. And Connor is, of course, the host of Tomlinson Talks on Lotus Eaters and the brilliant Deprogrammed podcast with the New Culture Forum. Connor, so great to have you here. Do you agree with Nigel Farage, given what you wrote in Courage Media, do you agree with Nigel Farage that actually Reform UK could now be the UK's last hope?
Well, I don't see much change coming from the Conservative Party. I know Kemi Badenoch announced a new policy based on Sam Bidwell's work over at the Adam Smith Institute about indefinite leave to remain. For those who don't know, by the way, because it turns out that Boris Johnson's entire team didn't know, as I've heard, if you were in the country of the UK for 5 years, no matter how much you contribute in taxes, no matter what visa you had to get here, you can apply for indefinite leave to remain, which means that you are allowed to just stay in the country. You don't need to keep updating your visa. You don't need to enter a different kind of employment, and you can claim social housing benefits and use the NHS as you so please. And 95% of all visas given to Boris wave migrants, so the massive million migrants a year, mainly from the third world, that have happened since 2021. 95% of those are non-taxpayers. So they are net drains. And the first wave of them from 2021 will get indefinite leave to remain next year. So Gummy Badenoch said, well, in 2029, when we win, we'll up it from 5 years to 10 years, and we'll make sure that anyone who entered illegally or hasn't paid tax will not be able to apply for ILR. The recommendations given to her, and I know this for a fact, were to restrict ILR to a number of countries that are net tax contributors and close to our culture, so they're easier to assimilate, and it was to be 15 years rather than 10 years. Don't know why she decided not to restrict it to certain countries. Don't know why she knocked 5 years off and made the policy smaller. And it's that kind of poor instinct. And it's also the same kind of poor instinct of appointing Priti Patel your foreign secretary when she was the architect of said Boris wave and decided to defend her immigration record, saying critics like you and me, Dan, should apologize to her for bringing up the fact that 95% of immigrants are not tax contributors, for example. It's those kind of instincts that show that the Conservative Party is in a death spiral. It's why their headquarters looks to be shutting down. It's why they're dismissing their activists. It's why they can't seem to win for losing these days. And it's why Robert Jenrick, one, couldn't deny the fact that were he leading, they'd be rising in the polls because he'd be doing a right-wing arms race with reform right now. But two, it's why Robert Jenrick was refusing to rule out a pact with reform, because you can read that as him heating up the pool before he decides to dive in, whether or not his party decides to follow him. Now, as far as reform go, I actually agree with Tim Montgomery, which I know is surprising because Tim might have been a bit soft over the years. But what Tim, I think, is saying is that he is cautioning against reform buying the polls, because the polls can be fickle. Polls try to shape public opinion as much as they register public opinion. And at the moment, because the Labour Party is deciding to respond to things like the Southport murders and the grooming gangs with suggesting a council on Islamophobia that criminalise even conversations about it, it's not that hard to outpace them and the Conservatives. What I think Tim is doing is warning of the same thing that I did in my previous critic column in November, which Richard Tice called garbage, and then his own voters turned around and said, well, hang on, that sounds a bit cocky. I don't like that. It's saying that you want to be Trump too, not Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton said, it's our time, she deserves it, and basically stepped on an electoral rake and has never recovered ever since. You don't want to buy your own hype and think that victory is inevitable because the other guy looks non-credible. What you want to be is Trump term 2. You want to have a massive folder of legislation to sign on day one. You want to present a credible alternative to the histrionic failures that are trying to run against you. And then when you win with the popular consent of the public, then you actually deliver on your promises. And so I think that's maybe what Tim's cautioning. Put policy over polls.
Yeah, and I would also say, I guess, from a political point of view, Connor, don't believe that these people do not want to destroy you. I think that was the great thing about the recent Trump campaign. He went in with his eyes wide open, and I do still believe that sometimes Farage and Tice and Yusuf believe that they can get the deep state on side, that they can work within the current system. And that frustrates me. I saw them saying earlier this week, oh, it will be much more difficult for us than Trump because we've got to deal with the British deep state, effectively, the civil service, whatever you want to call it. But I would argue surely part of the policy platform should be dismantling that deep state, because otherwise you're not going to be able to do whatever you say to the people that you will be doing. And we've seen that time and again, haven't we, with Boris and, of course, Liz Truss.
Yeah, it shouldn't take a assassination attempt, as it did with Trump, to alert you to the fact that politics is existential. These people that are embedded in the Home Office, take the Islamic Network, for example, or Dame Sarah Khan, the government's former anti-extremism advisor, who said that Nigel Farage should be put on a cabinet office watch list because he said that two-tier policing is real. I mean, you only have to read the Alexis J report, for example, to know that it's certainly real to do with the grooming gangs. Those people would rather see him dead than victorious. And so having his MPs, like Richard Tice, come out and say, congratulations to Kay Burley on her retirement from Sky News. It's like, these people hate you. They are your enemy. They are not to be conciliatory clapped as they walk out the building. You should be cheering as they pack up their belongings in a small cardboard box because they can no longer call you racist and try and put a target on your head. So hopefully, what I hope reform is doing is that lots of people behind the scenes that don't do interviews like this are listening to people who are sliding articles and pre-drafted bits of legislation in front of them saying, okay, here's the elements of the British deep state. Here's how the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act empowered the civil service and put the state on rails so these activists in the civil service can do whatever they want, no matter what the government of the day is. Here's the Equality Act, which prevents you from firing them and creates all these little fifth columns of identity groups like the LGBT activist network or the Islamic network in the Home Office that influence policy. Here's the Charities Act of 2011 that ensures that the government has to give taxpayer money to charities that position themselves as community leaders or enhancing community tensions or doing equality and diversity. You know, the same stuff that Doge is ripping up right now. I hope Reform have got plans, as Rupert Lowe has suggested, for a great repeal or maybe a restoration act so we can restore the British state to its former glory, and to do a Doge UK to cut all that waste. And it seems like some indications have been made that this is on their radar. I just hope that people are putting in the proper pen to paper work over the next few years so that on day one, they can just sign the legislation and put us back on the right track.
Yes, by the way, I'm quite glad. I mean, look, I like Richard Tyson so many ways, but I am quite glad you raised the post on X about Kay Burley, right? Because I saw that earlier this week and I was like, Richard, what are you doing? Why? Like, when are you going to understand that the MSM are never going to accept you? And what's so funny, Connor, is I'm just looking through now and look at the responses. Debbie Eaton just posted the vomit emoji. Mike's going like that. Steve writes, that's like saying you were lucky to have a root canal this week. Snoffer said, glad you like her. Many haven't forgotten her hypocrisy during COVID. I mean, it goes on and on and on, doesn't it? And well, I do think that's the misunderstanding. And I think Nigel has that misunderstanding too. He thinks by being accessible to the media, he can turn around their deep hatred, and he won't.
Kay Burley specifically, spoke untruths on air about my Liz Truss interview, and then deleted the post, but didn't send me an apology or anything. So she was more than happy to be an ill-informed propagandist on the airwaves and suffer no reputational damage. So the idea that this person can be brought on side, or even better, I think the idea that Richard Tice should revel in the fact that Kay Burley might have a positive opinion of him one day if he's nice enough to her. No, you should be happy that these people have a negative opinion of you. Like, I wear that hope not hate hit piece as a badge of honor, because if those awful communists who have decided to try and ruin my country liked me, I would be doing something wrong. Trump has that opinion of the media. If CNN were writing positive stories on him, he would have to reassess his position. And so I think Reform should take that approach. They should treat the media as a hostile interlocutor and not try to seek their approval, nor pat them on their back as they're on their way out the door, because Kay Burley can see that Sky News itself is a sinking ship because they've burned all their credibility in the last few years.
And actually, I think it is worth just looking at the different treatment that Kemi Badenoch gets from the mainstream media, although I'm also interested to know whether you think that she is dealing with the very obvious Reform UK threat in the right way. This was a big interview she did this week, which actually got a lot of coverage on the flagship bulletin on the British Bashing Corporation watch. But first, something really important to talk to you about. Scammers and spammers who are out there to ruin your life. We've all experienced more and more of those spam emails, text messages, and robo phone calls. Not only are they annoying and really time-consuming to deal with, but they usually represent a gross invasion of your private information that can cause vast reputational and financial damage. And I mean, how the heck did they get your information in the first place? Well, it's likely as a result of data brokers who know everything about you, your health information, relationship status, mortgage details, so much more actually, and then sell it for a profit. These data brokers can directly or indirectly expose sensitive information to bad actors, putting you at risk of identity theft. The number of data breaches worldwide rises every year. According to the annual data breach report by the Identity Theft Resource Centre, it actually went up by 72% in 2023. This means that you and your loved ones are at a constantly increasing risk of data breaches as growing lists of data brokers hold your personal information. That has then been sold or published online without you even knowing about it. Let me tell you how shocking the consequences can be. Health insurance companies could actually raise your rates based on your online activity. Huge loans have been taken under people's names without them even knowing about it. And scammers have even started to use AI to, wait for it, mimic the voices of friends and family to trick victims into sending them money. These imposter scams rely entirely on the voice data they can find online. While you can ask these data brokers to delete your personal information, the process takes hundreds of hours to do manually and requires repetition. But the good news is that today I have a solution for you that I use and personally endorse. Go to incogni.com/outspoken and get 60% off an annual plan. Now, Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf, requests your personal data removal, and handles any objections from their side. The whole process is automated, ensuring that your data stays off the market by conducting repeated removals and taking your data down if it pops up again. That's what makes the yearly subscription especially advantageous. Now, I do the annual plan so that I'm constantly being taken off these lists. It truly is a simple process. Create an account, grant Incogni the right to work for you, and they will contact the data brokers on your behalf to request your personal data removal. It has helped me so much. You can go to incogni.com/outspoken and get 60% off. That's 60% off an annual plan right now. It could be the most important decision you make. But now, back to the show.
And we need to make sure that we are not creating an automatic right to British citizenship. It is something that's really special.
Are you panicking about Nigel Farage? Because when I speak to plenty of your colleagues privately, they are.
We need to make sure that we understand what is going wrong, and that is that we've just been kicked out of government. The public aren't just going to rush back to us because Labour is doing badly. We knew they'd do badly. We need to rebuild trust with the public. So of course they will put their vote with the protest party.
He's an existential threat, isn't he, to the Conservative Party, Nigel Farage?
Every party is an existential threat to the Conservatives. We are in a competitive political environment, and there's no point complaining about what other people are doing. We have to make sure that we're offering the best product. I think changing the rules to indefinite leave to remain is one of the ways that we can do that.
Are you convinced, Connor Tomlinson?
Well, changing the rules in 4 years, I mean, currently she has no prospect of getting into government anyway, judging by the polls, but changing the rules in 4 years when the millions of people have already settled here under indefinite leave to remain rules, it won't matter. She should be currently lobbying Yvette Cooper to just sign this way, because she doesn't actually have to amend the Nationality and Borders Act to do this. She doesn't have to change the law. She can just write a letter as the Home Secretary and change this overnight. So she should be saying, well, if you want to bring down immigration, why don't you just do that now? You can do that by fiat as Home Secretary. Why aren't you? She should be hammering her on this. But I don't think Kemi is an effective rhetorician. Any time that she writes an article or well, some of her more effective articles are probably written by Spads, but there you go. Anytime she herself writes an article or drafts a tweet or gives an interview, her words just sound hollow and kind of contentless, and she constantly misses open goals. I mean, I'm not just referring to the idea that she accused Reform UK of manufacturing the membership numbers and now still hasn't properly apologised. The other day, I just accidentally ratioed her on one of her tweets because she referred to the UK as a project. Now, nobody who feels like this is their home, their country, that they would die to defend their family in this green and pleasant land, thinks of it as a project that any old technocrat can come to and just tinker with a passing fascination with it. And I just put my homeland as not a country, Kemi, and the fact that you don't feel that way is evident by your language. And me, with an infinitesimally small account, got far more engagement. Now, I'm not saying that Twitter ratios convert into actual real politics, but it does convey this kind of mimetic loserness. Like, Trump was not getting ratioed on his own tweets. Nigel Farage does not get ratioed on his own tweets. And it's because they move through the world as if the forces of history are kind of swirling around them. Kemi just doesn't have that. I would honestly sooner expect to eat my shoes than her becoming Prime Minister.
Okay, well, please, I really hope you don't have to do that, especially if they haven't been cleaned in a while. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.